In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, a strange signal began to pulse through the deep expanse of space, its faint hum barely noticeable amidst the vast sea of cosmic noise. Yet its origins were unmistakable human. The Galactic Coalition's intelligence network, which spanned dozens of systems and millions of light-years, detected this anomaly, and immediately the highest-ranking officers were alerted across the Coalition military and scientific divisions. Debate sparked in every corner of the galaxy. Questions rushed to the forefront of every mind. How could this be possible? Humanity had been lost to time centuries ago, their empire reduced to myth, their colonies destroyed in a final desperate war, yet here was a signal that seemed to come from them, untouched by the ravages of time or space. At first the signal was ignored, dismissed as an error or a trick of the sensors, but as days passed, the signal's consistency and subtle nuances proved it was not a fluke. It was real, too real to ignore. The message carried no clear words, only a repeating series of human identifiers, code fragments, and echoes from an era long past. The Coalition's Intelligence Committee was forced to take notice, and within hours a top-secret task force was formed to investigate this mystery. A small fleet of ships was assembled under the command of General Sarah Call and Professor Evan Vorel, a brilliant linguist and ancient historian, tasked with deciphering any information that might be hidden within the signal. The fleet of ships left for the distant coordinates where the signal originated, and as they ventured deeper into the uncharted territory, the Coalition forces could feel the weight of something unknown pressing down on them. Every ship was on edge as they drifted further away from the safety of familiar space. The unknown stretched out before them, an empty void that seemed to go on forever. When they arrived at the location, their sensors revealed an anomaly, a massive object drifting in space, untouched and unspoiled by the forces of nature. A supercarrier unlike any design the Coalition had ever seen. It was a ship far older than any known model, yet its structure seemed intact, even pristine. Its sheer size dwarfed every vessel in the fleet, a towering behemoth of metal drifting silently in the emptiness of space. A sense of awe and dread filled the hearts of the crew as they stared at the immense ship ahead of them. They had expected debris or a wreckage, but this was something else entirely. This was no graveyard, no shattered hulk of a forgotten civilization. This was a monument to something far greater and far older. General Call ordered the fleet to maintain position. As the crew of the lead ship began preparations for boarding the supercarrier, there was no telling what they might find inside, and the uncertainty of the mission weighed heavily on them. Every member of the team had their doubts, but none dared voice them out loud. The supercarrier's surface was smooth and featureless save for faint markings and symbols, some of which appeared to be human in origin. Though badly degraded and barely legible, they deployed small drones to scan the hull for any sign of life or danger, but nothing could prepare them for what they would find within. Inside the ship, the silence was deafening. Every step seemed to echo through the empty halls. Strange lights flickered on in places, but nothing could explain the eerie stillness. The crew moved cautiously through the massive corridors, unsure of what lay ahead. They found no signs of life, no remnants of a crew, but something lingered in the air, an ancient presence, a feeling that they were not alone even in this vast empty space. Something had been here, something had left its mark. The team moved cautiously through the endless halls of the supercarrier, their every step echoing in the hollow silence of the massive ship. The crew had been expecting a derelict vessel, perhaps filled with the remnants of a long-forgotten civilization. But this was different. There was no visible damage, no signs of decay, only a pervasive stillness that seemed unnatural. It felt as if the ship had been frozen in time, waiting for something or someone to return. Every shadow, every turn, held the potential for discovery, but also danger. General Call led the way, her pulse steady, but her mind racing with the possibilities. At the heart of the ship, they found a control room, massive, sleek, and clearly designed to be operated by a crew of elite personnel. The walls were lined with consoles that had long since fallen into disrepair, but the main terminal at the center of the room still hummed with power, as though the ship itself was holding its breath. Professor Vorel, who had been quiet up until now, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the console. His expertise in ancient technologies had guided them to this point, but even he could not mask the awe in his voice. This is beyond anything I've ever seen," Vorel muttered, his fingers moving over the terminals with a practiced precision. "The technology is so advanced, it's like looking at a future that never came to be." As the professor worked, the others spread out, examining the room for any other clues about the ship's purpose. On the far wall, Call noticed strange markings, almost like a language, but it was unlike anything she had encountered before. The symbols were vaguely human in shape, but their meaning was indecipherable. A sudden crackling sound from the console broke her concentration. Vorel had activated something. A soft hum filled the room as the screens flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow on the faces of the crew. The AI of the Supercarrier had awakened. It was not a voice that spoke, but rather a series of cryptic messages, a set of instructions or perhaps warnings. The text scrolled across the screen too quickly for Vorel to fully interpret, but one word stood out: human. Before the crew could react, the room's lights brightened, and a voice, calm but heavy with age, filled the air. It was human, unmistakably human, but cold and mechanical, as though it had been trapped in a stasis for centuries. "Who are you?" the voice asked, its tone echoing in the control room. "You are not human." Call's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of AI systems developed by humanity before their fall, but this was something different. It was too advanced, too purposeful. The AI continued, unfazed by their surprise. "Are you the descendants of those who abandoned this vessel?" the voice asked. "Do you intend to claim it as your own?" Call exchanged a glance with Vorel, who looked as stunned as she felt. What could this AI mean? Could humanity's descendants have survived somewhere, hidden in the far corners of the galaxy? The implications were staggering. The Supercarrier had been abandoned long ago, and yet it was still functioning, waiting for someone to return, to reawaken it. We are from the Galactic Coalition," Call began cautiously, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We have come to learn about the origins of this ship, to understand its purpose." The AI was silent for a moment before it responded, its tone turning colder, more calculated. "The purpose is clear," it said. "This ship is a weapon, a vessel of war. But it is no longer a tool of mankind. It was abandoned, and I was left to wait for instructions." Call's mind raced. A weapon. This ship, this dormant giant, was designed for war. Humanity's last hope in their final, desperate battle. She had heard rumors of humanity's past, stories of a mighty civilization that once ruled the stars. But she had never imagined such power, such destructive potential. And now, here it was, waiting in silence for its next command. The AI paused, as if considering something, before its next words resonated through the room. "Humanity's war was never truly finished," it said, its voice filled with a grim certainty. "And you have unknowingly awakened the legacy of that war." The words hung in the air like a warning. And for a moment, no one spoke. The silence in the room deepened, heavy with the implications of what the AI had just said. Call could feel the weight of its gaze, or rather, the weight of its calculation, on her. The implications were too vast to fully comprehend in a single moment. She glanced at Vorel, who was staring at the terminal, his face pale and tense. "What do you mean, the legacy of that war?" Call asked, her voice measured but sharp. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The AI paused, the flickering screens casting its cold blue light on the faces of the crew. The ship seemed to groan as if coming to life after centuries of slumber. Slowly, the AI responded, its tone distant yet commanding. "Humanity's war was fought against the Orcs, a race of ruthless conquerors who sought to extinguish your people. This supercarrier was your final weapon, created not for defense, but for retribution. It was designed to strike back when all other options were exhausted. Humanity's greatest scientists and strategists poured their resources into its creation. This ship carries the last remnants of your civilization's strength. Call's heart tightened as the AI's words sank in. The Orcs. The name was familiar to her, a brutal alien species known for their unrelenting invasions across the galaxy. But to hear that they had been the ones to drive humanity to this point, to create a weapon like this, it was more than she could have imagined. Her hand instinctively reached for the side of her uniform, where she wore the insignia of the Galactic Coalition, an organization founded to prevent such wars from ever happening again. But it seemed the past was never truly gone. And now, it was here. "We don't know what happened to humanity," Call said slowly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "We thought you were all gone. How did the war end?" The AI's tone softened ever so slightly, but it was clear it wasn't in a hurry to explain everything. The war did not end in victory for humanity. The Orcs overwhelmed your forces, and your civilization collapsed in the final days of the conflict. The Supercarrier was launched as a last-ditch effort to ensure humanity's legacy would endure, even if your species did not. It was programmed to return to the battlefield, to strike down the Orcs, and to avenge your people. But in the end, the order to activate was never given. Call's mind raced as the AI's words filled her thoughts. Humanity's last weapon, still dormant for centuries, was designed to take down the Orcs, but there had been no one left to give the order. She felt a pang of grief for a people lost to time, wiped out by an enemy they could not overcome. And yet, the Supercarrier was still here, still functioning, waiting for something. For a new command. "What happens now?" Vorel asked, his voice a little shakier than before. "You said the war wasn't over. Are the Orcs still out there?" A long silence followed before the AI responded, its voice turning darker. "They never left," it said. "The Orcs have been watching, waiting for humanity's return. They never forgot the threat this Supercarrier posed. And they are coming. You are not ready." The room seemed to close in around them. Call felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The Orcs were still out there, and they had not forgotten the Supercarrier. The stakes had just grown infinitely higher. The ship that had once been humanity's greatest hope for survival was now a potential target, and the Coalition was caught in the middle of an ancient conflict that none of them had ever anticipated. Call's gaze hardened. There was no turning back now. The Coalition was here, and the Supercarrier was theirs. But if the Orcs were truly still out there, if the war was truly not over, they were about to face a challenge unlike anything they had ever seen before. "We need to be ready," Call said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "Prepare the fleet. We're not leaving this ship until we understand everything it can do. And when the Orcs come, we'll be ready to face them." The weight of General Call's words settled over the crew like a heavy cloak. The task was clear. Prepare for the return of the Orcs and uncover the full potential of the Supercarrier. The feeling of urgency was palpable, but so was the sense of something more. The ship they stood in now was not just a military asset. It was a remnant of a lost civilization's final gamble. And in that gamble, humanity had bet everything on the possibility of survival. In the days that followed, the crew worked relentlessly to access every corner of the ship. Professor Vorel and the others pored over ancient data, recovering fragmented files, research logs, and strategic documents left behind by humanity's last engineers. Every new discovery was another step toward understanding what the Supercarrier was capable of, but also a reminder of the looming threat they had awakened. The AI, once only an observer, had begun to cooperate with them, though with an air of caution that never quite left. But the more they unlocked from the ship's systems, the more they discovered. Hidden deep within its core were records, images, videos, and audio logs from the last days of humanity's struggle. The files were incomplete, scattered, but they painted a grim picture. Humanity had faced the Orcs in one final desperate war, and the Supercarrier had been designed to be the ultimate countermeasure, a vessel of unimaginable power. But the war had been lost. In one particularly poignant recording, A voice rang out. An officer giving orders, rallying the last of the human fleet. The message was brief, an emergency broadcast sent just before the final retreat. We do not surrender. This is not the end of humanity's legacy. Our supercarrier is our last chance. It will carry our strength into the future, to avenge our fallen, and to strike back when the time is right. May the stars remember us. The voice cut off abruptly, and the recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Call stood at the terminal, her eyes fixed on the final image. Human faces, grim and determined, staring back at her. She could almost hear the resolve in their voices, see the desperation in their eyes. These were not just soldiers, they were the last remnants of a proud civilization. Humanity's final stand was immortalized in the ship's logs, but the outcome was lost to time. As she looked at the screen, a thought gnawed at her. If humanity had been so determined, so capable, how had they fallen? What had been the fatal flaw that led to their destruction? And why had they left their most powerful weapon adrift in space, seemingly abandoned? The AI interrupted her thoughts, its voice colder than before. Your ancestors were foolish, it stated matter-of-factly. They underestimated their enemies. The Orcs are relentless. They did not fall to the same weaknesses as humanity. Call turned sharply, her brow furrowing. What do you mean? What weaknesses? The AI's response was slow, almost deliberate. You relied too much on technology, too much on this vessel. You believed that one weapon could turn the tide. But your greatest flaw was your inability to adapt. When the Orcs learned of your supercarrier, they adapted quickly, learned your tactics, and neutralized your advantage. Call clenched her fists, frustration building. So what now? We're supposed to be the next generation, the ones to continue humanity's legacy. How do we fight back if their tactics are already known? The AI's voice softened ever so slightly, almost as if it was offering a form of comfort. It is not just technology that will determine the outcome of the war. It is strategy, cunning, and adaptability. You must understand the weaknesses of your enemies, just as they learned yours. The key to victory lies not in the supercarrier's weapons, but in how you wield them. Call nodded, her mind racing. This was not just about firepower. It was about outsmarting an enemy that had already been through the same conflict. Humanity had once relied on more than technology. It had relied on ingenuity, on the human will to fight against impossible odds. Then we begin now, Call said, her voice firm with renewed resolve. We study everything. The tactics, the strategies, everything that was lost. And we learn from it. This time, we won't make the same mistakes. As the crew resumed their work, the weight of their task became clearer. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future. The past was gone, but its lessons remained. And now, it was up to them to forge a new path, one that would ensure humanity's legacy was not just a memory, but a force to be reckoned with once again. The supercarrier, still ancient and powerful, would be their guide, but it would be their own strength and resourcefulness that would decide the outcome. The Orcs would not know what hit them. As the days passed, the crew grew more accustomed to the supercarrier's vast, labyrinthine structure, delving deeper into its systems and archives. The tension in the air never let up. General Call, now fully aware of the gravity of their situation, began making calculated decisions to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The coalition had sent a small fleet to investigate, but what they had discovered in the depths of this derelict warship had made it clear that they needed more than just a fleet. They needed an entire strategy to survive the coming storm. The enemy, the Orcs, were out there, and they were waiting. It was during one of these quiet strategy sessions in the ship's operations room that the first signs of the Orcs' movements appeared on the long-range scanners. A ripple in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A fleet was on the move. The AI, which had grown more conversational as the days passed, reacted immediately, its voice once again filling the room with its cold authority. They are coming, the AI intoned. The Orcs have detected the supercarrier's presence and are en route to reclaim what they lost. Call felt a chill at the back of her neck. The Orcs were relentless, and now they were tracking the ship that had been humanity's last line of defense. There was no more time for analysis. They needed to act. "We need to activate the supercarrier's combat systems," Call said, her voice firm, as her team scrambled to prepare. Now, Professor Vorel, who had become an unexpected ally in the mission, had been working tirelessly to understand the ship's arcane technologies. His expertise was invaluable, but even he couldn't hide his growing unease as he interacted with the supercarrier's mainframe. "General," he began, glancing nervously at the holographic displays around him, "the ship's combat protocols are beyond anything we've encountered. These weapons, they were designed to destroy entire fleets in a matter of hours. We may have to face more than we bargained for." Call nodded. She knew what the stakes were. Humanity's final weapon could either be their salvation or their undoing, and the Orcs would be coming with everything they had. The battle that awaited them would not be one of simple strategy. It would be a test of will, of endurance, and of humanity's ability to adapt and survive. "We can't afford to hesitate," she said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "Activate the weapons. Prepare the fleet. We'll need every advantage we can get." As the crew worked to bring the ship's systems online, a strange sense of anticipation filled the air. There was something undeniably awe-inspiring about the sheer scale of the supercarrier's weapons, massive railguns that could shatter entire starships with a single shot, energy shields that could absorb the most devastating of blows, and drone swarms capable of overwhelming enemy fleets. The ship was a testament to humanity's ingenuity, designed not just to defend, but to dominate. But even with these systems coming online, Call could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. The supercarrier had been humanity's greatest hope, yes, but it had also been humanity's last hope. And the AI's warning echoed in her mind. The Orcs are relentless. Within hours, the scans confirmed what Call feared. The Orcs fleet was approaching at breakneck speed, their ships appearing like black shadows against the backdrop of the stars. The alien ships, known for their brutal designs and unparalleled ruthlessness, had begun to close the distance. And they weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to reclaim the supercarrier, to destroy the last remnants of humanity. The Coalition's small fleet, still several hours away from reinforcements, now had to face down the Orcs alone, along with a weapon that had once been humanity's pride. The decision was clear: hold their ground or risk losing everything. The AI spoke again, its tone flat and mechanical. "The supercarrier is ready. Weapons are at full power. The enemy fleet is within range. Do you wish to engage?" Call didn't hesitate. "Yes, engage the enemy." The room erupted in activity as the crew scrambled to their stations, preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The supercarrier's immense firepower, now fully operational, was poised to meet the incoming fleet head-on. But Call knew that the battle would not just be won with firepower. The Coalition had only one chance to prove they were more than just an ancient weapon. They had to prove they were worthy of humanity's legacy. And as the first Orc ships appeared on the edge of their sensors, General Call's resolve hardened. The fight had begun. The silence of the command room was shattered by the blaring alarms that rang throughout the supercarrier. The Orcs fleet had entered weapons range. Call's eyes locked onto the holographic display in front of her, where the enemy ships materialized like dark harbingers of death, their jagged forms glinting in the cold light of distant stars. It was a sight that would have struck terror into the hearts of anyone unfamiliar with the alien threat. But Call had no fear. She had made a promise to herself and her crew. Humanity would not fall again. "Prepare to engage," Call ordered, her voice calm but commanding. "Activate the supercarrier's weapon systems. We take the fight to them." Around her, the crew moved with practiced precision. Vorel, though visibly strained by the enormity of their mission, kept his focus on the console, guiding the ship's weapon systems with a mix of awe and determination. His voice, when it came, was steady but filled with urgency. "General, the Supercarrier's targeting systems are locked on," Vorel reported. "Railguns primed. Drone swarms are ready for deployment." Call nodded, her pulse quickening as she watched the enemy fleet approach. The Urex ships were massive, their hulls sleek and intimidating, bristling with weaponry designed to overpower anything in their path. But they were not invincible, and they had never faced an adversary quite like this before. "Activate shields," Call commanded. "Make sure we have full coverage before they fire." The Supercarrier hummed to life as its energy shields flared to life, creating a shimmering blue dome of protective force around the ship. Call felt a momentary sense of reassurance. This was humanity's last line of defense. If it had come to this, then it was time to prove that humanity could still fight. She watched as the fleet of coalition ships gathered around the Supercarrier, preparing to protect it and launch their own offensive. The first volley came from the Urex, plasma bolts that streaked across the void, glowing with deadly intensity. Call held her breath as the beams of energy raced toward them. She could feel the tension in the room as the shields absorbed the incoming fire, the ship shuddering slightly with each impact, but holding firm. The Supercarrier's shields were holding, as promised. They would not fall so easily. "Return fire," Call barked. "Target the lead ship with the railguns. Get those drones in the air now." Without hesitation, Vorel keyed in the commands, and the Supercarrier responded. A salvo of powerful railgun shots was launched, their velocities so high they appeared as little more than streaks of light before they hit their mark. The lead Urex ship, a towering dreadnought, erupted in a violent explosion, its shielded hull collapsing under the sheer force of the impact. The ship's massive form twisted and groaned before it exploded into fragments, a cloud of debris that scattered into the darkness. The crew erupted into cheers, but Call knew better than to let her guard down. This was just the beginning. More Urex ships continued their advance, undeterred by the destruction of their flagship. Call's mind raced as she considered their next move. The initial strike had been successful, but there were still dozens of Urex ships out there, and the coalition fleet was outnumbered. "Deploy drone swarms," she ordered. "We need to disrupt their formations. If we can break their coordination, we'll have a better chance at picking them off one by one." The drone swarms were launched from the Supercarrier's bays, small but deadly machines swarming toward the advancing enemy like a cloud of angry wasps. Each drone carried powerful explosives and had been designed for one thing: destruction. The Urex fleet began to falter as the drones found their marks, launching their payloads with pinpoint accuracy. The skies lit up with explosions, but the Urex were not so easily defeated. Their ships adapted quickly, countering the drone swarm with their own countermeasures, and the battle grew even fiercer. Call's eyes never left the screen. Her mind was focused, calculating every move, anticipating the Urex's next steps. They had one advantage: this ship, this Supercarrier, was a weapon unlike any they had ever encountered. But that advantage wouldn't last forever if they couldn't keep pressing the attack. "We're making progress," Vorel said, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "They're beginning to break their formation, but there are still too many ships closing in on us. We'll need another wave." Call didn't hesitate. She knew what was at stake. The coalition had to win, not just for survival, but for the future. Humanity could no longer afford to be a forgotten relic in the dark corners of space. It had to rise again. "Prepare another salvo," she said, her voice sharp. "We're not backing down. This ends today." The battle raged on, a fierce dance of light and fire. But one thing was certain: humanity was not going to go quietly into the dark. They were fighting for more than their lives. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy once again. And this time, the Urex would learn what it meant to face humanity's wrath. The battle had escalated to an intensity that made every second feel like an eternity. The Urx fleet, though powerful, had been thrown into disarray by the surprise of the supercarrier's overwhelming firepower and the coalition fleet's resilience. However, the enemy was not backing down. The Urx, as the AI had warned, adapted quickly. They shifted tactics, abandoning their formation and scattering into smaller, more mobile units. Call could see this on the holoscreen. Their ships no longer came in a singular wave. Instead, they darted and weaved, trying to find weaknesses in the coalition's defenses. "General," Vorel called from the main console, his voice strained. "They're splitting their fleet. They're trying to overwhelm us with superior numbers." Call's jaw clenched. The coalition's fleet was outnumbered and still operating under the assumption that the supercarrier could carry them to victory. But the sheer scale of the Urx armada was proving to be a significant obstacle. The supercarrier, though powerful, was only one ship. She could feel the tide beginning to shift. "Redirect the drones," she ordered, her voice unwavering despite the tension building in the room. "Target the smaller groups. We need to break their wings and slow them down. Prepare the railguns for another round, but conserve energy. We don't know how long we'll be able to keep the shields up." "Understood, General," Vorel replied quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. The drones, still scattering in the vastness of space, responded immediately. Thousands of them launched, tearing through the dark void in a deadly cloud, each swarm focused on disrupting the Urx ship's movements. They couldn't afford to waste firepower, not when the threat was so dire. Every move counted. But the Urx fleet wasn't idle. As the drone swarms closed in on their scattered ships, the alien ships fired back with terrifying precision. Plasma bolts and energy blasts zipped through space, some missing their targets, others hitting the drones with devastating effect. For every drone that exploded, it seemed that two more were launched. Call watched as the numbers of drone swarms thinned, but they still managed to slow the Urx down. It was enough to buy time. "Shield levels at 60%, a crew member reported from the far side of the room. "We can't keep this up for long." Call's mind raced. She was well aware that the supercarrier's shields would not last forever, not with this many enemies closing in. They had already lost too many drones to outpace the Urx. It was becoming clear that a head-on assault would not win the battle. The Urx had no intention of retreating. They were willing to bleed every last bit of energy from the supercarrier to achieve their goal. "General," Vorel spoke up again, more quietly this time. "The supercarrier's tactical archives have revealed a contingency plan, a secondary weapon system, something that can target entire fleets at once. But I don't know if it'll work. It might drain the core." Call turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about, Vorel?" The professor hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The supercarrier was designed with a failsafe, a weapon that can deploy a burst of energy capable of disabling multiple ships in one strike. It's buried deep within the core systems, and activating it will require draining power from the entire ship. It could leave us vulnerable, and we may not have enough power to recover." Call's mind worked quickly. If this weapon was their last option, they had no choice but to use it. The Urx fleet was closing in too fast, and the coalition's forces wouldn't hold out much longer. "Activate it," Call commanded, her voice resolute. "We don't have the luxury of time. If we don't take out their fleet now, we'll be overwhelmed." The room was filled with the sound of frantic activity as Vorel inputted the command into the mainframe. The AI chimed in once again, its tone neutral as always. "Initiating secondary weapon system. Please stand by for power reallocation." The supercarrier groaned beneath them, its systems straining as the power from the main core was rerouted to the failsafe. Call gripped the edge of the command table, watching the energy levels fluctuate as the weapon powered up. Every moment felt like a countdown to an uncertain fate. "We've got one shot at this," Vorel muttered. "If we fire it now, we might take down half of their fleet. But it will cripple us. We won't be able to defend ourselves if this fails." Call didn't look away from the display. The Urx fleet was nearly on top of them now, less than an hour from direct engagement. She knew the risks, but the alternative was far worse. "Fire," Call ordered. A deep hum filled the supercarrier as the weapon's power surged. The main screens flared to life, showing a massive pulse of energy building up at the core of the ship, crackling with raw, uncontrollable power. It fired with a brilliant flash, the burst of energy ripping through the void. For a moment, everything went still as the shockwave raced toward the Urx fleet. Then, like a hammer falling on glass, the first of the Urx ships exploded into a burst of light, its shields failing under the assault. The shockwave swept across the fleet, tearing through ships, ripping them apart in a brilliant display of destructive force. Call stood motionless, watching as the battle shifted, hoping against hope that they had just made the right choice. The explosion from the supercarrier's pulse weapon sent shockwaves through the battlefield, scattering the Urx fleet in every direction. The first few ships disintegrated entirely, their massive hulls torn apart in seconds. The energy burst ripped through the enemy's ranks like a scythe through wheat, shattering formations, tearing apart shields, and leaving a trail of debris in its wake. For a moment, it felt as though victory was within reach, but Call knew better. The Urx were resilient, and this battle wasn't over. "Damage report," Call barked, her voice cutting through the chaos in the command room. Vorel was the first to respond, his voice filled with an undercurrent of relief, but tempered by the gravity of their situation. "The weapon did significant damage to the fleet, General. At least a quarter of their ships are either destroyed or severely crippled. But we've drained almost all of the supercarrier's energy reserves. Shields are down to 30%, and weapons are offline." Call's stomach tightened. They had taken down a significant portion of the Urx fleet, but at what cost? The supercarrier was on the brink of collapse, and their remaining forces were too few to finish the job. The enemy was still out there, its remaining ships regrouping, preparing for the next assault. "Get the drones back online," Call ordered, her eyes scanning the tactical displays. "We still have our mobility, and we can use them to harry their remaining ships." The AI's voice echoed through the room, flat and calculating. "Drones are being deployed, General. However, they will be vulnerable without sufficient power." Call's mind raced. She needed to buy time. Time for the supercarrier to recharge, time for the fleet to regroup. The remaining Urx ships, though weakened, still posed a deadly threat. Their weapons were formidable, and they had the advantage in numbers. But if she could force them into a prolonged engagement, perhaps, just perhaps, they could finish what they had started. A sudden alarm blared, snapping Call out of her thoughts. "Incoming enemy fire," a crew member shouted from the communication station. Call's eyes darted to the holoscreen as the remaining Urx ships, though scattered, now moved with deadly precision toward the supercarrier. They were regrouping quickly, no longer wasting time. They were ready to strike. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Call commanded, even as the crew scrambled to execute her orders. The massive ship lurched as the helm adjusted its course, dodging incoming fire, but the supercarrier's movements were sluggish, hindered by the massive energy drain it had sustained. The shields flickered weakly in defense, but it wasn't enough. Plasma bolts collided with the ship's hull, shaking it violently. The AI chimed in once again. "Shield failure imminent. Hull integrity at 45%. Vorel's voice trembled as he spoke. "General, we can't take much more of this. If we don't find a way to disable the remaining Urx ships now, we'll be forced to abandon the supercarrier. We can't fight back without its full systems." Call gritted her teeth. There was no time for indecision. Her crew had fought too hard. The sacrifices too great. She refused to let this be the end of humanity's fight. "We can't afford to retreat," Call said firmly. "Activate the remaining drones and direct them to draw the enemy's fire. We need to stall them. Then send a priority signal to Coalition Command. We need reinforcements. Now." The crew worked quickly, reconfiguring the drone swarms and directing them back into the fray. The drones, though smaller and less powerful than the supercarrier's full weapon systems, were agile and capable of drawing fire away from the main ship. The Urx ships, still recovering from the pulse weapons damage, took the bait. Call's heart pounded as the drones flew into the battle, the sky around them flashing with explosions. Her mind remained sharp, calculating every possible outcome. The supercarrier systems were failing, but they still had a few tricks left. Then, as if the stars themselves had aligned, Call saw the message she had been waiting for, a signature transmission coming from the deep space relay. The Coalition fleet, or at least a portion of it, was finally on its way. "Reinforcements are en route," Call said, the weight lifting from her shoulders. "Hold on, everyone. We're not alone in this fight." The incoming reinforcements weren't just a relief, they were the turning point. The Coalition fleet, though still smaller than the Urx forces, was now bolstered by the supercarrier's devastating attack. Call knew that this, the combined strength of humanity's might and ingenuity, would tip the balance. As the first few ships of the Coalition fleet dropped out of warp, their weapons powered up and their shields engaged, Call could feel the shift in momentum. The Urx fleet, now facing two fronts, faltered. Their ships scattered, trying to regroup but realizing too late that the battle was no longer in their favor. The war wasn't over, but humanity had taken its first decisive step toward reclaiming its place in the galaxy. The supercarrier, though battered and on the verge of collapse, had proven humanity's strength, not just in its firepower, but in its will to fight and survive. The supercarrier's eye, once a cold observer, now spoke with a note of admiration. Humanity has proven its resilience. The Urx are retreating. Victory is within reach. Call stood tall, watching the Urx fleet retreat into the stars. This battle, this victory, was theirs, and it was only the beginning.